Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're sailing into some pretty unexpected waters, politically speaking.
Definitely uncharted territory for some.
Right. Our mission today is to really look at this huge global movement. It's mostly Gen Z protesters, young people challenging power structures all over the place. And what we found, well, their main symbol, their battle standard, it's not what you'd expect.
No, not at all. It's the Jolly Roger.
Yeah, specifically, that skull and crossbones wearing a straw hat from the Japanese manga and anime One Piece.
And what's really fascinating here, I think, and what the sources are showing us, is how fluency in pop culture, especially things like anime and manga, it gives them this incredibly fast, kind of universal way to talk about really deep political problems.
Problems that cross borders, languages, political parties.
Exactly. We're tracking this global wave of what some call generational discontent. And somehow, this fictional world, it's become this powerful real-world language for fighting back against corruption, against perceived tyranny.
Okay, so let's unpack that. We've looked at reporting from places like the Associated Press on the actual protest happening now.
Right. Boots on the ground stuff.
And we've also dug into academic work on political philosophy and, of course, the themes in the manga itself. And they all seem to point to this incredible idea: fiction is bleeding into reality, or at least providing the script for resistance. So the big question for us today is, how does this, 25-year-old story about a pirate who's literally made of rubber become this global symbol for fighting systemic oppression from South America to Asia?
And what does it tell us about where political action is heading?
Exactly. What's the future look like?
Well, I think the usefulness of the story, the narrative, is that it speaks so directly to the core issues that are driving these protests everywhere. Things like, massive economic uncertainty, inequality getting wider and wider, corruption just baked into the system, and this feeling that the institutions built by older generations, they've failed them.
Yeah, a sense of being let down.
Completely. So for a generation that feels the game is rigged, this story, One Piece, it gives them more than just a flag to wave. It offers a kind of moral roadmap for saying no, for justifiable defiance.
Okay, let's start with the reality on the ground. The sheer scale of this wave of generational discontent, it's huge.
It really is.
The numbers are one thing, but the reasons behind it are consistent almost everywhere. Economic worries, inequality, corruption, seeing leaders just look after their own families and friends. Nepotism. This isn't just anger in one place. It feels like a global malaise.
That's a really important point. These aren't just isolated flare-ups. They feel synchronized, like expressions of the same frustration popping up everywhere.
Indicating what? A deep mistrust.
A deep mistrust of governments. Governments seen as either doing too much, being incompetent or just neglectful. We've seen major youth-led protests across Africa, Asia, South America. Countries like Nepal, the Philippines, Indonesia, Peru, Morocco, Kenya, Madagascar, the list goes on.
And the impact can be, well, instant, really dramatic, especially when these young people get organized online. Take Madagascar, for instance.
Yeah, that was remarkable.
Reports show these young protesters, calling themselves Gen Z Madagascar, they tapped into this deep public anger. And after weeks of pushing, demanding change, their movement played a direct role in a military mutiny.
Which ultimately forced the president, Rajoelina, out.
Forced him to leave the country. That's a fast, concrete result. Generational anger organized digitally, seizing a moment when the state looked weak.
And the demands, they're surprisingly universal wherever you look. In Morocco, North Africa, you have this group, Gen Z 212. They call themselves a leaderless collective, named after the country code.
What are they asking for?
Not abstract ideology. They want basics. Better public services, better roads, hospitals, schools, quality of life stuff, things they feel the establishment just isn't delivering. And that creates this profound sense of being abandoned by the people in charge.
You also see how quickly things escalate when their initial complaints are ignored, or worse, met with force. Peru is a stark example.
Definitely. It started with a specific issue, right? A pension law.
Exactly. A controversial pension law the youth saw as unfair. But bam, it exploded. Broader demands against rising crime, corruption everywhere, and then the crackdown came.
A brutal crackdown. 50 civilians died. And if you listen to the protesters themselves, you get why the anger is so raw. There was this quote from David Tufor, a 27-year-old electrician.
What did he say?
He framed it as a fight against corrupt officials who, in our case, are also killers. He pointed out how murders and extortion were rising just as the government seemed to be weakening anti-crime efforts. That resonates.
That feeling that the officials aren't just corrupt, they're actually dangerous, that fuels this rejection of the whole system.
Yeah.
So when President Boluarte, who is already under investigation for bribery and for her role in the crackdown, when she was just replaced by an interim president,
It wasn't enough.
not even close.
Yeah.
The goal isn't just swapping faces at the top anymore. It feels like they want a complete clean out of the entire structure.
And this is where their methods get really, really interesting. This generation, they're completely changing how protests get organized, how the story gets told. It's all about the digital shift, speed, and controlling the narrative.
It's different from older movements that just use social media, isn't it?
Oh, completely. For Gen Z, the digital world is the organizing space. It's where they live.
And this mix of like leisure tools and high-stakes politics,
Hmm.
older authorities just don't seem to get it. In Nepal, they called it the Discord Revolution.
Right. They organize rallies, sure, on TikTok, Instagram, X, the usual places. But the real discussions, the leadership debates, that happened on Discord.
The gaming chat platform.
The very same one. A platform made for planning raids in World of Warcraft, now being used to suggest who should be the country's interim leader.
Wow. So the structure of gaming communities.
Fluid, flat, consensus-based.
Yeah.
They just applied it directly to real-world politics.
What are the implications of that, according to the sources? Using gaming platforms must change the whole authority dynamic.
It absolutely does. It just bypasses all the old rigid hierarchies. You know, a 60-year-old activist might need formal meetings, established structures. A 20-year-old on Discord, they can spark a protest, get agreement, nominate someone new in hours, and almost anyone can jump in.
Much harder for authorities to shut down.
Incredibly hard. This fluid, leaderless model is tough to infiltrate, tough to decapitate by arresting one or two people.
And their messaging. It uses absurdity as a weapon, makes it go viral. The Discord revolution wasn't sending out political pamphlets.
No, they were using memes, anime characters, One Piece included, plastered next to slogans about corruption.
They use ironic music too, right?
Yeah, Bo Burnham's song Bezos, mocking billionaire wealth, right alongside Bella Ciao, the classic anti-fascist anthem. That mix makes it almost impossible for power to respond seriously. How do you argue with a meme?
And slang becomes strategy. Protesters saying corruption is sus, meaning suspect, not just casually, but as a real political statement, an indictment.
It takes genuine anger and wraps it in this layer of irony and makes it approachable, shareable.
The visuals, too. Skateboarders gliding past riot police.
Or protesters holding up reverse Uno cards at the police lines, symbolizing turning the tables. The sheer absurdity of it, a skateboard against an armored truck, a game card against state power, travels so much faster online, hits harder emotionally than any official statement.
Which brings us to how information power has shifted. Citizen journalists, vloggers. They're shaping the story now. That British travel vlogger in Nepal.
Right, he just stumbled onto the protests, filmed it, and got over 25 million views.
25 million. That single video probably reached more people than all the traditional news outlets combined covering the same event.
Absolutely. The legacy media often feels like it's just confirming revolutions after they've already happened, after they've been narrated and validated online.
And the sources really stress this. This generation doesn't just distrust governments. They distrust the traditional press, too. They see bias. They see owners with agendas. They feel a disconnect from their culture, their reality.
So legitimacy isn't measured in newspaper column inches anymore. It's measured in virality, in cultural resonance, that shift in trust. That's maybe the biggest challenge, the scariest thing for the old power structures.
Okay, we've got the anger, the tactics. Now let's get into the really surprising part. The symbolic power coming from one piece. Why this story? It sold, what, over 500 million copies?
Over 523 million worldwide, yeah. It's massive. And it's become Gen Z's sort of battle cry against oppression, precisely because it's not just escapism. It works as a political allegory. It's inherently political.
The author, Ikiro Oda, didn't just write an adventure story.
Not at all. He essentially wrote a critique of the modern world woven into this grand pirate saga. The themes in there, poverty, corruption, cruelty by institutions, human rights being denied, they're so universal, they just click instantly. It gives kids everywhere a shared vocabulary for resistance.
Okay, give us an example. Healthcare inequality, that's a major flashpoint in many of these real-world protests.
And the manga tackles it directly. The Drum Island arc. You have this villain, Walpole. He doesn't just take over. He creates a system of medical tyranny.
Wow.
He literally gets rid of almost all the doctors, keeps just a handful of the Ishii 11, and puts them behind a massive paywall. Citizens have to literally beg this tyrant for basic healthcare, and he can just say no.
Wow.
The sources point out how devastatingly close that is to real-world fights over access to healthcare based on wealth, insurance nightmares, drug pricing, where health is treated like a luxury good, not a right.
That's a really stark parallel, weaponizing a basic need. And it goes deeper, right, into things like slavery, racism.
Absolutely. The story pulls no punches. It shows the horror of slavery directly with the human auction house arc and then the whole Fishman Island story.
Hmm.
It uses the deep-seated prejudice against the fishmen to explore real-world racism in a really nuanced way.
No.
It gets into how systemic oppression fuels anger, fuels violence in return, and how that cycle of hate gets passed down through generations. It's not just simple good guys versus bad guys.
And beyond those specific injustices, there's a critique of the state itself. You mentioned the void century.
Right, that's the central mystery. A whole chunk of history deliberately erased by the powers that be. You have these ancient stones, the poneglyphs, that hold the truth, and then there was the O'Hara incident where scholars trying to uncover that truth were wiped out.
Which mirrors.
Exactly how authoritarian regimes operate in the real world. Suppressing history, rewriting textbooks, destroying inconvenient truths to stay in power. If the facts contradict the official story of the world government in the manga, they have to crush the facts, erase the history. That clicks with protesters who feel they're being lied to about their own country's past or present.
What about the economic side? We talked about protesters calling out the lifestyles of politicians' kids. Does One Piece have an equivalent?
Oh, absolutely. The ultimate symbol of that elite privilege.
Right.
The celestial dragons or world nobles.
Who are they?
They're the descendants of the founding families of the world government, the absolute top tier. They live in luxury, demand tribute, expect total obedience, all based on their birthright. They are the embodiment of that untouchable, inherited wealth and power protected by the global system. They're everything the protesters despise about nepotism and elitism.
But the core symbol, the hero, Luffy, his goal is different, isn't it? It's not typical revolutionary stuff.
Exactly, his dream. To be king of the pirates. But, and this is crucial, he always clarifies, that doesn't mean ruling anyone. It doesn't mean grabbing power or treasure in the usual way. Becoming the freest man in the world. That's a radical goal, almost philosophical.
Okay, let's build on that. Some analysis suggests this idea challenges the whole neoliberal market economy and the global order of states.
Yeah.
How does being the freest man connect to such a big political critique?
Well, think about what freedom means for Luffy. It's freedom from constraint, especially constraints put on you by an unfair government or the demands of a global economic system you didn't agree to.
So, rejecting the basic deal of the state. Obey our rules, we protect you.
Pretty much. The traditional order is built on sovereignty. The state sets limits. Luffy's dream rejects that bargain. His ultimate aim is the power to act on his own moral compass, regardless of world government laws or market pressures. And look at how he leads. Loyalty, friendship, jumping in to help people being oppressed. He's not a bandit out for himself. He's framed as a freedom-seeking revolutionary that inherently challenges the foundation of state power and maybe even the economic rules they enforce. And to really get why Gen Z latched onto this story, you need to understand the villain, the world government. Oda didn't make them mustache-twirling bad guys. He designed them as this sprawling, plausible, totalitarian system. Secrecy, corruption, and above all, maintaining global order, even a deeply flawed order at absolutely any cost.
And this government unites, what, over 170 countries?
Yeah.
Ruled ultimately by those celestial dragons we mentioned?
Right, and enforced on the ground by the Marine Corps. But the Marines don't just police. Their guiding principle is absolute justice.
Which isn't just about fairness.
No, it's a specific doctrine. The word for justice segi is literally written on the backs of the admirals' coats. And this absolute justice means maintaining order comes first. Eradicating perceived evil, even if innocents get caught in the crossfire. The end justifies the means, basically, to keep the system stable.
That sets up a huge conflict, doesn't it? Order versus actual justice.
Exactly. It mirrors real debates in international relations. Thinkers like Hedley Bull ask this exact question. Can you achieve justice in the world without risking the stability of international order? One Piece dives headfirst into that dilemma again and again.
And the manga's answer isn't always comforting.
Often it's chilling. The world government's ultimate tool for absolute justice is the Buster Call.
Which is?
An all-out naval assault designed to completely obliterate an entire island, to erase a threat, or more often, a secret. It shows the terrifying price of prioritizing absolute order over everything else. And crucially, these horrific actions cause deep splits within the Marines themselves. Even the soldiers of the systems start to see the tyranny.
It's like Vice Admiral Saul.
A key example. He was ordered to take part in the Buster Call on O'Hara, the island of scholars studying the Forbidden Void century. And he refused.
What did he say? That quote was powerful.
He said, "Carrying out the operation in the name of law is tyranny." He directly disobeyed, turned against his orders, and sacrificed himself to save one child, Nico Robin, from that destruction. That moment forces you, the reader or viewer, to ask, when does following the law become morally wrong? When does order become oppression?
But isn't there a danger in validating that kind of defiance? If the system's goal is global stability, even a flawed stability, doesn't a pirate approach risk sliding into chaos, which could hurt the vulnerable even more?
That's the core tension, the moral complexity the story wrestles with. Luffy and his crew aren't trying to install a new political system. They're trying to break free from the constraints of any system they see as unjust. We see the struggle again later with Admiral Fujitora.
What was his situation?
He was faced with this awful pirate, Doflamingo, who was actually a warlord sanctioned by the world government to rule the island of Dressrosa. But Doflamingo was a tyrant. So Fujitora had this choice. Follow the rules, keep recognizing the government-backed tyrant to preserve order, or side with the other pirate, Luffy, who is fighting for real justice for the people Doflamingo oppressed.
And Fujitora chose.
He essentially chose justice over flawed order. He publicly apologized for the government's failure, effectively retired from his high rank, and said something profound. He said, "If we lose credibility by admitting fault, we did not have any in the first place."
Wow. Basically saying the system's legitimacy was already gone.
Exactly. He understood that covering up injustice to preserve the system actually destroys the moral basis the system claims to stand on. And that message that the system itself might not deserve its authority is incredibly empowering for protesters challenging it in the real world.
And for anyone listening who maybe isn't familiar with the manga, it's important to stress the real-world historical weight behind these fictional events. The destruction of O'Hara, wiping out scholars seeking truth.
It echoes so many real tragedies: state-sponsored cultural destruction, book burnings by dictatorships. Even the horrific scale of something like the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where civilian populations were sacrificed for a perceived strategic end.
There's also the Flavon storyline.
Right, the white lead disease, where a whole population was basically poisoned by industrial pollution the government knew about and covered up, leading to persecution and death. It directly mirrors historical examples of systemic oppression, even genocide, based on things like race or where people lived. This is why the story feels so real, so potent. It validates the feeling that sometimes challenging authority isn't just political, it's a moral necessity.
It taps into deep philosophical ideas about resistance.
Absolutely. It connects right back to someone like John Locke and his ideas about natural rights. Locke basically argued that rulers need the consent of the governed. If they violate fundamental rights, life, liberty, property, the people have the right to resist, even overthrow them. That's essentially what Saul did at O'Hara.
And there's an even more radical connection. You mentioned Fanon.
Frantz Fanon, yeah.
Yeah.
He wrote about violence from the perspective of colonized, oppressed people. He saw it not just as a tactic, but sometimes as a necessary act for people to reclaim their humanity from a system that dehumanizes them. The manga suggests that fighting back against a system that protects injustice isn't just politics. It can feel like a moral duty, a way to assert your own worth.
Okay, so let's talk about the sheer reach of this. Over 523 million copies sold. That's not just a successful book. It means one piece is like a shared global text.
Exactly. It's a vehicle for this common anti-tyranny ideology that just jumps over national borders and language barriers.
It creates what you called a mythical reservoir.
Yeah, a common pool of characters, stories, and ideals that young people everywhere can instantly tap into and rally around. The story plants the seeds for real-world movements by giving them a ready-made language for things like freedom and fighting corruption. And critically, it's a language that bypasses traditional political jargon, which, as we've said, this generation deeply distrusts.
And we're seeing this literally play out. The symbol isn't just online. It's physically appearing in protests in Indonesia.
Yeah, that's a striking example. The Straw Hat Jolly Roger flag is appearing on buildings, on trucks. People are explicitly using it as a symbol of defiance.
Defiance against what specifically?
Against the current president, Subianto, his government's policies, economic issues. the feeling of elitism and corruption. It's a visual shorthand for we're unhappy with the system.
And the government's reaction kind of proves the point, doesn't it?
It really does. Sources say Indonesian law enforcement were actually ordered to take down these flags, to confiscate them. That shows they recognize the flag isn't just fandom, it's a political statement. It's potent. There was this truck driver, 80, in East Java, who straight up said he flew the flag because of his disappointment and resistance against the government.
That's incredible. The state mobilizing against a fictional pirate flag because they understand its real-world power. So, looking ahead, what does this all mean for global change? What are the big implications?
I think the biggest one is decentralization. These movements are fundamentally different because they don't rely on a single charismatic leader or a traditional party structure.
No central HQ.
None. And they learn from each other incredibly fast. Tactics that work in Nepal, like using Discord for organizing, they get copied and adapted almost instantly in Indonesia or Peru. It's internationally cross-pollinated.
And they're fundamentally distrustful, right?
Yeah.
Not just of government.
Exactly. They're often indifferent, even hostile to conventional political leaders. They distrust legacy institutions across the board, mainstream media included. They rely on their own networks, on citizen-generated content that feels authentic and goes viral. It's a whole different way of communicating politically. Authority comes from resonance, not from an editor's desk.
So manga, anime, pop culture, stuff older generations might have dismissed as just kids' entertainment.
It's now fully part of the political landscape. It provides this common ground, these shared ideals, freedom, loyalty, fighting bullies in power that work across cultures. It's a new kind of soft power, but it's not coming from a government. It's bubbling up from a shared global youth culture that's really motivated to shake things up.
So we've moved into a world where, arguably, a story about a rubber pirate fighting a corrupt world government is a more effective, more relatable manifesto for change globally than a lot of dense old political theories.
It seems that way. This movement is showing everyone, including maybe older people who sympathize with the goals fighting corruption, wanting fairness, that even if the tools and the language look different now, Discord servers and Jolly Rogers instead of pamphlets, the fundamental drive for change is still there. And maybe it's stronger than ever. So if we try to tie this all together, connect it to the bigger picture, what the One Piece movement really highlights is this fundamental shift in political communication.
How so?
Well, a single piece of culture, something like a manga that's everywhere, it can now act as this incredibly fast, decentralized symbol for fighting back against universal problems. Corruption, inequality, power that's not being checked. And it works in a way that maybe old school manifestos or political tracks just can't anymore.
Because it resonates on a different level.
Exactly. It resonates because the story itself grapples with these core moral fights, order versus justice, that every society deals with. It makes that revolutionary urge feel, well, morally justified to a huge audience.
So what does this mean for the systems they're actually protesting against? It sounds like the pirate today isn't just a criminal figure anymore.
No, not at all. They're a symbol. A symbol of defiance, of questioning the basic idea that the state, the established order, is automatically right or just.
It embodies this belief that if the rules themselves protect the powerful and the corrupt,
then breaking those rules, flying that pirate flag, becomes the real act of justice. Maybe the only path to real freedom in their eyes.
And this defiance seems deeply tied to a hunger for truth. You mentioned the world government in the manga destroying history.
Yeah, they're willing to wipe out entire islands to keep the truth about the Void Century hidden because they're terrified that truth would unravel their control. And that narrative confirms the protesters' deepest suspicions, that the ultimate fight is always about who controls information, who controls the past.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to end on for you listening. If tyranny, fictional or real, often works by erasing history, by keeping uncomfortable truths hidden to maintain order, what real-world void century, what truths about maybe economic failures or corruption or historical wrongs are being kept under wraps right now, supposedly in the name of stability?
And what unexpected symbol, what bit of pop culture might be the next unlikely banner used to drag that truth out into the light?
That, I suppose, is a deep dive for another time. Thanks for joining us.